the idea, theory, doctrine of progress and the cognitive limits. I have chosen this idea of progress as the subject because I see it as an oppositum to the category of limits. There is a very large body of literature on the idea of progress, not only by philosophers, but also other scientists, humanists. I will just mention two books which I used to prepare my presentation. A classical one is by John Berry, The Idea of Progress, an inquiry into its origin and growth from the early 20th century, and one modern from Robert Nisbet, a well-known philosopher, History of the Idea of Progress. This huge literature testifies the crucial role of the phenomenon of progress it plays in many modern discussions in the European and not only European culture. I start with a very personal, optimistic remark. I am persuaded, in general, that on the long run, our human world is more and more a friendly one for human beings. How do I understand that? Like Edward Gibbon, maybe known to you, the author of the History of Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, I am convicted that every age of the world has increased and still increases the real wealth and happiness and knowledge and perhaps also the virtue of the human race. So I am very, now I say it this way, happy that I am living in this beautiful world of today and then I can take part also in this conference. The term of progress, etymologically, comes from the Latin word gressus. Gressus means a step, a way to procedure. It means a movement through a series of events or points in time and a development through time, specifically an advancement to a higher, yes, what does it mean, higher or more developed state. The synonym or close in meaning words are advancement, improvement, development, evolution, revolution, future. The antonyms are regress, decline, degeneration, limits, boundaries, fall, decadence, stagnation. Even if the meaning of the quoted by me now words are very close, you have to distinguish between a phenomenon of progress, a concept of progress, an idea of progress, a theory of progress, a doctrine and ideology of progress. That are different things, even if their meanings cross. Generally, progress is defined as the idea that from the beginning, the human condition in almost all fields is steadily being improved. The simplest dictionary definition says that progress is a kind of advancement toward a goal, an improvement or a development from a lower state to a higher one. And the problem is what is low and what is high. The notion of progress is an evaluative notion, even a normative notion. And as you know, when you use these notions in statements, it's not easily decide if the statement is true or false. That's the nature of these evaluative notions. As a concept, human progress means the idea that our civilization has moved, is moving, and will move. That's probable. In desirable direction. Yes, what's the desirable direction? A humanist dimension of the idea of progress says that the past has been a chaos without order or design, and that by our human efforts and intelligence, employing now natural sciences and technological outcomes, a supreme instrument of power, mankind has risen above necessity to the kingdom of freedom. The connection between progress, the notion of progress and freedom is especially pregnant in the Enlightenment age. As a theory, human progress involves a synthesis of the past and a prophecy about the future. In the history of science, in the last 100 years, the progress is close connected with natural sciences. Only lately, a philosopher, Philip Kitcher, also known by philosophers, distinguishes two concepts of progress. A teleological one, when it means decreasing distance from a goal, and a pragmatic one, when it means that the human well-being is improving by every step. Since the 16th century, the category of progress is used very often, and it is held for one of the most important notions for the European culture. The history of the notion of progress is not so old, even if we have some remarks about the progress already in antiquity. The notion of progress that it used in antiquity was limited, really very limited, and meant a relative improvement limited to specific fields concerning mostly the material life of human beings. You can say that the history of the idea of progress started with God's command in Genesis. I quote it now. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish, over the sea, and over the birds, and over the sky, and over every living that moves on the earth." Christianity in antiquity shared with Judaism the persuasion of a preceding golden age, an age of innocence, and then the succeeding fall of man. So, not progress, but fall, deterioration. The Greeks had another idea, not maybe of progress, but of development. The philosophers have been speaking about eternal returns. Mircea Eliade, very famous books about that notion. The Greeks had also the idea of the word cycles, of the repeating of the history. We are developing in circles. For Greeks, a progress was different for different people and domains, not excluding cycles and the possibility of regress. According to the Christian theory, which was worked then by the fathers, church fathers, and especially by St. Augustine, the whole movement of history has the purpose of securing the happiness of a small portion of people, only a small portion. So progress was not for all people, but for a small portion, the one who belonged to Christianity. For Augustine, the course of history would be satisfactorily complete if the world came to an end in his own lifetime. That was the persuasion of the old Christians there. They expected the coming of the Christ and the finishing of the world. So there was not a progress or a limited for some people. In Augustine's system, the Christian era introduced the last period, so not progress, but last period of history, when again should come the old age of humanity, old gold age of humanity. Let us now go to the medieval ages. The medieval theory of progress maintained the belief in degeneration, endorsed by Hebrew methodology, but it definitely abandoned the Greek theory of cycles. No cycles anymore. The history of the earth was recognized in Middle Ages as a unique phenomenon in time. And that is something special, unique. It would never occur again, or anything resembling it. More important than all is the fact that Christian theology constructed a synthesis which for the first time attempted to give a definite meaning of the whole course of human events, a synthesis which represents the past as leading up to a definite and desirable goal in the future. But the men of Middle Ages would have found it hard to imagine that the time is coming, it was in the modernity, in which the last judgment, because this was the goal of the Christianity, they expect really the last judgment for all people coming, that this idea of last judgment will cease to erode any emotional interest. I wonder how many people are today afraid of last judgment. Modernity. A right notion of a bearing of history on affairs could not be formed or formulated until men had grasped the idea of human development. The intellectual climate of classical antiquity and the ensuing ages were not propitious to the birth of the doctrine of progress. It was the time called Renaissance, from the 14th to the 17th century, which came up with a new idea of progress. Its great results were two. Self-confidence was restored to human reason. The Calmid was then the age of rationality. And the second idea was they recognized life on this planet as possessing a value independent of any hopes or fears connected with life beyond the grave. the ancient theory that mankind revolves in a vicious circle was definitely destroyed by the discoveries of natural sciences. It was an enlightenment or enlightenment and the positive dream in progress without limits as the mental equipment of modern citizen. The Enlightenment philosophers saw science rather than a religious faith as the reason, a motor, incisive, of progress without limits for human beings, for human well-being. This is also a very unclear notion. But it is not true, let us mention, commonly held belief that enlightenment was somehow primitive or naive in thinking about the progress. The philosopher of the Enlightenment didn't believe in progress as inevitably advancing humankind and society toward greater states of perfection. Progress could occur in either a negative, downward direction or a positive, upward direction. It could even occur in cycles. The Enlightenment's concept of progress had not only a material dimension, that was till now, because they believed in materially. Now the Enlightenment's philosophers thought about advancement, progress in area of intellectual things, social, cultural, and moral dimension. Please pay attention to this moral dimension. If there is any improvement in this moral dimension of humanity. The 19th century came up with an idea, with a new idea of evolution, the Darwinian evolution, and emancipating from the rigors of classical education and preoccupation with scientific affairs. It was the positivistic notion of progress that presupposes that the material reality is only one form of reality. Secondly, that our rational faculty and senses are the only cognitive faculties of human beings, and they didn't reduce human nature to material reality. So long as men believed that Greeks and Romans had attained, and in the best days of their civilization, an intellectual plane which posterity would never hope, so long as authority of their thinkers was set up as unimpeachable, and a theory of degeneration held the field, which excluded a theory of progress. There are some questions connected with some more questions connected with the notion of progress. Because progress is a very complex phenomenon. It can be approached from many different directions, from a philosophical, a religious one, an ethical, a sociological, a psychological, even economical. What really means the word advance when we say that progress is advancing? Development, that is advancing to a higher level of culture, of civilization. In what respect is culture advancing? If you don't say that it's only in the material dimension. How to define a long-term improvement in any possible domain? The optimistic version of the theory of progress presupposes that we know the outcome, that we know we are moving in a desirable direction, and that we know precisely what the destination of our culture is. But we don't know. To most people, the desirable outcome of human development would be a condition of society in which all inhabitants of the planet would enjoy a perfectly happy existence, a general felicity. All people in all the world will enjoy felicity, if that can happen on the earth. How to stage a progress or decline in the domain of social life? Was the Nazi system a decline in the history or a development? We know the positive influence of the Second World War on the whole culture and technology. It spread it then. What are then causes of social progress, and how to explain with causal relation periods of decline that are always coming? But when you say progress or when you say decline, you are already using an evaluative notion. Mostly they are meaning postulates. For the present, it is sufficient to say that in itself the idea of progress cannot be regarded as a law of social evolution. They are not laws of social evolution, as perhaps Comte believed the stages of development in the culture. Researchers do not prove that there will be a steady upward. What means upward? That's metaphorical notions. Movement in the distant future in a desirable direction as tested by ethical standards. What are the measures, indicators of progress, and how understand them in the spiritual, intellectual, and political dimension? Some specific indicators that can range from economic data, technical innovation, changes in the political or legal system, for instance, life expectancy that is certainly growing in all parts of our earth. These indicators are not enough to state that we are really moving in the expected direction. There is certainly a visible progress in public health. Indisputable materials were on the conclusion that in specific areas the death rate has declining. Now we have the explosion of people in Africa because improvement of the medical instruments. What is then the general goal of all human progress? In other words, what kind of world are we expecting? The meaning or the notion or the concept of social happiness is very blurred one. It can be generally used, but more as a rhetorical device, but not as a scientific. Anyway, today we are not so optimistic anymore as we used to be in the 19th century, that we see in what direction the future is developing. Let us summarize some results of our present considerations. The ideology of progress is called progressivism, and it is based on the idea the advancement in social organization, in education, in technology, in economics, based all of sciences, they are all able to solve main problems or all problems of humanity and so improve the human condition. Progressivists believe that in all domains of culture, there could be a cultural development without limits, and that the idea of cultural progress has an universal application to all cultures, to all societies. But after the atrocities of the two world wars and the Holocaust, many 20th century thinkers simply reject the idea of progress as an apt characteristic of our, and together of human history and human conditions. The optimistic view of a general progress in all domains of human activity and culture, in morality, religion, philosophy, politics, and so on, all of these domains of culture, all these developments have been accompanied by some sort of skepticism about the essential goodness of human nature. That is one big obstacle to the progress, the human nature, which builds and destroys. So the notion of human nature is very important if you would like to go deep into the phenomenon of progress. Most doubts raises the question of as individual, are you today better than you used to be yesterday? Will you be better tomorrow than you are today? And the moral progress of our society, for instance, of Poland. Are we on a higher level? If we follow the papers, we follow the media, we wouldn't say so. We are not so happy. Now I am coming shortly to the relation between progress and the limits of scientific knowledge. The most spectacular example of progress is found in modern sciences, and more precisely in natural sciences, connected with the development in technology. Look at these gadgets here we have. Is it a progress compared to these lectures that have been here 100 years ago? Sciences and technology are the most visible instrument of modern progress, because it is science or sciences seen as the sum total of all special disciplines and the sum total of all problems which belong to them by virtue of their subject matter, that set today the limits of knowledge in general and of the human rationality in particular. Sometimes it's also held that only in the field of science can we really speak about a progress. But is science really certainly in position to tell man where he stands and what place he occupies in the universe? The knowledge supplied by science or sciences is not merely today raw information, but is one supported by adequate body of evidence and which confirms its directness. What then really means progress in science? and the limits. The privileged position of sciences and scientific knowledge comes from their effective, elaborated method or methods of solving problems, even if the answers, laws, theories remain disputable and only temporary as long as not falsified. I remind here Popper. Discussing the range of science, we should have three different questions in mind. What problems have already been solved, indisputably solved, by some combination of scientific methods? Secondly, what problems can be solved by presently available methods? And thirdly, what problems are solvable, at least theoretically, by scientific methods in the future? Since the methodological analysis by philosophers of science, I mentioned here Thomas Kuhn, in the 70s, it is clear that the traditional notion of progress in the field in science as an accumulation, as a linear process, is not true, that sciences are developing by revolutions, abolishing what was before and putting new theories. Sciences develop rather by revolutions as they change, it's a very modern word, paradigms and its cognitive apparatus. The cognitive monopoly of scientists was exalted during the 19th century by positivistically minded thinkers and those who came under their influence in one way or another one. It is the positivists who saw the science as a sole adequate tool of cognitive progress and an effective instrument of bringing happiness to all mankind. But is it really so that problems unsolvable by a scientific method are not serious problems at all? I mentioned here Carnap, Rudolf Carnap, an Austrian philosopher. Is it true that sciences who have brought an array of information unknown to previous generations at the same time are proposing a naturalist belief in an endless progress, almost totally in all domains? And at the same time, they reject any forms of religious, supernatural worldview, what they see as a naive, outmoded, and contrary to reason. Today, sciences are rightly criticized because of their limitations to know phenomena in the area of human world. The progressive tendency since Francis Bacon was to reduce all qualitative modalities of nature to quantitative aspects. But is it really so that you can tell and characterize the progress in the human world by quantitative notions? So today, natural sciences are accused of a hyper-specialization. They are accused that they use only mensurate methods, that they don't know the holistic approach, that they reduced to a fragmentation of man's view of reality that could be dangerous, for instance, for modern medicine. The methods of natural sciences, predominantly finding law, they operated with laws, has yielded so far comparatively poor results in the social and humanistic studies. The limits of science are also there where we have problems that are inherently unsolvable by scientific method. By the very nature, a scientific method based on observation and experiment limits our knowledge to this, what is perceived by our eyes, senses in general. It limits our world to a natural reality. It was also another philosopher, Raymond, who said this famous ignoramus et ignorabimus. There are some areas of humanity where we don't know if we are going in the proper direction. Let me finish with the John Locke's saying or advice in epistemology. Since we cannot know everything, we would be well advised to observe and respect the extent and limitations of human knowledge. Thank you very much for your attention.